fractions and percentages. So the way the lesson will work, I'll talk you through the concept. I'll then put up some practice questions, be able to pause the video and have a go at those before having a look at the answers. I'll then also put up some challenging questions as well. Again, pause the video and then I'll go through the answers for those too. So let's start here. What I've drawn there, this one square, this represents one whole. And I could write one whole simply as a 1. I could even put in the decimal place as well, but there's no need to do that because beyond the decimal point has no value. Okay, so I can get rid of that and just write it as 1. Another way I can write it is 100%. Okay, it's one whole, it's the 100%. Another way is, as a fraction, it's 100 hundredths. One whole is made up of 100 hundredths, and it's also made up of 10 tenths. I'll come back to that shortly. However, I'm going to change now. I'm not going to have one whole. I'm going to colour in one of the squares here. So now I only have part of the whole. And the part of the whole I now have is 100. So that can be written as a fraction, 1 out of 100, 1/100. Okay? It also gives away how it's written as a decimal. And the full name for a decimal is a decimal fraction, because a decimal, again, is just part of the whole. So I can write that as 0, because we have no whole numbers. 0 again, because we don't have any tenths. 1, because that is the hundredths column. Okay? So we've got 100th as a decimal, 100th as a 100th as a decimal fraction, 100th as a fraction. And this also represents just 1%. Okay, so we've gone from 100% down to just 1%. These are all equivalent to each other. They all have the same value. So the next one I want to look at now, and it's linked to something we did back in September, is to the power of 10. So I'm going to colour in, there's 200ths, 300ths, 400ths, 500ths, 600ths, 700ths, 800ths, 900ths, and then I'm going to get to 10 hundredths. Okay, and that is the power of 10, because when I got to 900ths, we could write it like that. However, the maximum number you can have in any column is 9. So the fact we've reached 10 hundredths means we move along into the next column. So 10 hundredths is written as 0.1. 10 hundredths, as it says, can be written as 10 over 100. Remember, the denominator represents how many parts in the whole altogether. The numerator is representing how many parts I've coloured. This also has another name. It's not just 10 hundredths, but can also be written as 1/10. And that's what this value of this decimal fraction here is worth. It's worth 1/10. Okay, so it's 1/10, 1/10. Because our whole before was broken down into single parts, into hundredths, it can also be broken down into 10 parts, into tenths. 1/10, 2/10, 3/10, 4/10, 5/10, 6/10, 7/10, 8/10, 9/10. I'm missing a column off my 100 square. Fantastic. Okay, so there is now 10/10. That 10/10 also makes one whole. 10/10 equals one whole. Okay, so it's another way of breaking down the whole. So, remember though, it was 10 I've coloured out of 100. That is, because it's 10 out of 100, it's also worth 10%. Okay? So 10 hundredths is 1/10, and also worth 10%. 1/10, 10%, 1/10, 10%. They're all equivalent to each other. They have the same value. However, it's going to pose a slight problem here. We managed to write that out of 10. I'm going to give us a new value now. And that new value, I'm going to call it 13 squares. Now this time, I've got 13 hundredths. Okay, 13 hundredths there. I can write that 0 because there's no whole. 1/10. Okay, and 3 hundredths. That's the tenths. That's the hundredths there. Okay, so it's 1/10 and 3 hundredths, 13 hundredths. It is also equivalent to 13%. However, what I cannot do with this is write it over 10. Yes, I have 1/10 in there, but it would look like this: 1.3 over 10. You cannot do that. Okay, you cannot have a decimal as a numerator. So, even though we have a tenth within it, it remains over 100. Okay? So we've got 13 hundredths. 13 hundredths is 13%. They are all equivalent to each other. They all have the same value. So now I'm going to colour in. We've got 13 coloured in there. I'm now going to colour in
25 squares. So I've now coloured in 2/10 there. I need to colour in another 500. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, I've coloured in 25 hundredths. So that's 25 out of the whole, which is 100. 25 hundredths, by saying it, gives a way how to write it as a decimal fraction. 0.25, because there's also because there's 2/10 and 5 hundredths. Okay, 2/10 and 5 hundredths. 25 hundredths. It's equivalent to 25%. Okay? However, again, I cannot write this fraction over 10, but I can use a different numerator. Okay? Because 25, I could break down this whole into chunks of 25. There's my first chunk there. Snap the chalk. There's my first chunk there. Okay, that's 25. Here will be the next one. Okay, so I've got 2 lots of 25. Here now will be the next one. 3 lots of 25. Let me just shade those in so you can see. Okay, so that was 1 lot there. We stopped here, didn't we? So I've got to 3 lots of 25. And look here, there's another part there. Oh, so I can break down the whole, the 100%, into 4 lots of 25. So the whole now has been broken down into 4 equal parts. There are 4 parts to the whole. Of those parts, I have shaded in 1. I have shaded in 1/4. That still remains 25 hundredths are coloured in. 25% is coloured in. 0.25 is coloured in. And also I can say 1/4 is is coloured in as well. And let's just check that. We're saying it's made up of 4 equal parts of 25. Then when I do 25 plus 25 plus 25 plus 25, okay, that equals 100. Okay, so just checked that is correct. So 1/4 is equivalent to 25%, 0.25, and 25 over 100. So we've learned so far that fractions as part of a whole can be written out of 100, 10, and 4, and there are other ways too. Okay, so let's look at now, let's colour in even more. Chalk's not coming up very well. Look at another example then. So this time, I've coloured in 25 squares. Now I'm going to colour in 40. So, that's 30 squares coloured in. And now 40 squares coloured in. Okay. So again, I can write this. We have coloured in 40 out of 100 squares have been coloured in. 40 hundredths. Okay? I'm going to write it as it sounds. 0.40. And that does say 40 hundredths. But it also says something else. We can also say it as 4 tenths, because it's sat in the tenths column. So that means I can get rid of the 0 now, because it has no value, so I don't need to write the 0 on. So I've got 4 tenths. Well, that leads me to be able to write it as another fraction. It sounds 4 tenths. When I break the whole down into 10 parts, I've coloured in 4 out of the 10 parts. 4 tenths, 4 tenths, 40 hundredths. They are all equivalent to each other. I can also then write it as a percentage. It is 40% of the 100 square has been coloured. Okay? I can also write it as another fraction with a completely different numerator we've not seen before. I think to make this clearer, I need to draw another square on. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I'll put another one up here. 10 there. They are equal parts. I'll just have to take my word for it. Okay. So there's my whole, made up of 100 hundredths. Okay. I'm going to shade in 40 hundredths. 4. Okay, so there's okay. I've shaded in 40 hundredths. This time though, I'm not going to break it down into 1 part, 100 parts. I'm not going to break it down into 10 parts. I'm not going to break it down into 4 parts. I'm going to break it down into 5 parts. Oh, I'll use a different colour. I'll use a blue. There's 1 part, and we can see there's 20 hundredths in that 1 part. Second part, third part, 4th and 5th. I've broken it down into 5 equal parts. There are now 5 parts to the whole. And we can see, of those 5 parts, I have coloured in 2 parts. So another equivalent fraction there. We've got that 40%, that 4 tenths can be written in 3 different ways. 40 over 100, 40 hundredths, 4 over 10, 4 tenths, which we showed there, and 2 fifths, 2 over 5. I'm going to do one final one as well, just to show that there are many ways that the whole can be broken down into. Okay? And I'll use this one here, there's less on it. I'm going to colour in another 10 tenths. Okay, coloured in 10 tenths there. That now takes me to 5 tenths. So let me write that down as a fraction. 5 tenths. As I've written it as a fraction, helps me to write it as a decimal fraction. 0.5. And of course, I can write it out of 100 because that's what the whole is made up of. One whole is made up of 100 hundredths. So out of 100, I've coloured in 50 parts. I can also write this as another fraction again by doing this. Straight across. So dramatic, it's broken my chalk. I can break it down into 2 parts. So my denominator now have 2 equal parts, and of those 2 equal parts, I've shaded in 1. So, 5 tenths, 50 hundredths is equivalent to half, which again, as a percentage, is written as 50%. Okay? So, hopefully that explanation has helped you. I'm now going to put up the practice questions. I'll tell you then to pause the video. Once you've completed the questions, then check out and see if they're correct with the answers, which I'll quickly go through, and then I'll do the same with the challenge. So, let's take a look here now. So, there's the lesson 1 practice question. Now, I want you to pause the video. Okay, hopefully you've had a go at those. Let's take a look at the answer. So, 12% is equivalent to 12 hundredths, 12 over 100, 12 out of 100. I cannot write it out of 10 because then I have to put a decimal over the 10, which I obviously don't want to do. We've then got 20 hundredths. I can, because I can write that out of 10, so it's 2 tenths. But also, if I was to break the whole down into 5 equal parts, I can write it as 1/5. This is also equivalent to 20% and 0.2, 2 tenths. Remember, that's a decimal fraction. 0.8 is equivalent to 80%. It's equivalent to 80 over 100, 80 hundredths, and also 8 tenths. Question number 4, 4 hundredths. I purposely put this one in because I expected quite a number of you to write this in the tenths column. No, it's 4 hundredths. There are no tenths. So it should have been 0.04 and it's also equivalent to just 4%. Here and now, the challenge questions. Can you please order those fractions from smallest to largest? Not order the fractions, but order the mix of fractions, decimal fractions, and percentages. You have 3/4, 0.8 or 8/10, 50%, 0.45, otherwise known as 45/100, 61%, and 3/5. Question 2. Can you please fill in the gaps? You should have 16%, 1/5, 0. And then what percentage goes there? And the arrow's in the wrong place, so that should be 23/100, 23/100. Please give those a go now. Pause the video. Okay, so let's take a look at the answers. So we should have had 45/100, then it should have been 50%, because that would have been 50/100. Then it should have been 3/5, because that would be equivalent to 60% or 60/100. Then it should have been, or even 6/10, then 61%, then 3/4, because that's equivalent to either 0.75, 75/100, or even 75%, which is of course smaller than 0.8, which is equivalent to 80/100, 80%. And we've got our inequalities down here. 16% is less than 1/5. Okay, so 1/5 is 20/100, 2/10, or 20%. So you should have had in there 0.21, 21/100, which is less than 22%, which is less than 23/100, which of course is equivalent to 23%. Okay, so now you need to log on to MyMaths and give those questions a go. Best of luck.